You're not boarding this flight. Step aside immediately.
My boarding pass is valid. You have no reason to stop me.
The gate agent called for priority boarding at 7:14 in the morning, and the line at gate B42 began to move with the quiet, purposeful shuffle of people who had done this 1,000 times. Marcus Webb stood third from the front, his phone in hand, scrolling through a 40-page merger brief he had already read twice. The document would reshape the European logistics market. The meeting in London was the final handshake on 6 months of work. Missing it was simply not an option. He looked like he had stepped off a music video set rather than out of a boardroom. Dark jeans, a black cashmere hoodie, a pair of spotless white sneakers that cost more than most people's car payments. A watch on his left wrist caught the terminal's overhead lighting just enough to suggest something expensive without announcing it. He carried a single slim carry-on and moved with the unhurried ease of a man. A bisque de Wab, who had been in priority boarding lines his entire adult life. Chicago O'Hare hummed around him, the smell of coffee and jet fuel, the distant roar of engines on the tarmac. Flight 880 to London was boarding onto time, which meant he would be wheels up before 8, in a car headed to the city of London by early evening, sitting across the table from Carter Hughes by 7, and back in his Manhattan office by Thursday with a deal signed and a market reshaped. It was a good morning. That was when he noticed the gate manager. She was standing slightly apart from the other agents, arms crossed, a posture that read as vigilance, but felt like something older and smaller. Blonde hair pulled tight, eyes the color of a February starry sky. She wore the Skylink K-Link Airlines navy blazer with the stiff attention of someone who believed the uniform was the point, not the person wearing it. Patricia Hollis. Her badge read, Gate Manager. She was scanning the priority line with the slow, deliberate sweep of someone who was looking for something specific and was fairly certain she had found it. Her gaze stopped on Marcus. He noticed but said nothing. He stepped forward when the line moved, held out his phone with the boarding pass displayed, and offered the small neutral smile that 20 years of navigating these moments had taught him to deploy automatically. I'll need to see a physical form of identification, she said. Her voice had a clipped administrative quality, like a form being filled out in real time. Of course, he reached into his carry-on for his passport without breaking stride. He handed it to her. She took it and opened it with both hands, studying the photo with a concentration that went a beat too long, then looked back at his face. Harrison, she said, then caught herself. Mr. Webb. Marcus Webb. She looked at the boarding pass on his phone, then at the passport, then at him again. There's a discrepancy, she announced. The word was delivered at a volume that carried. The couple behind Marcus in line shifted. Someone behind them craned a neck. What kind of discrepancy? Marcus asked. His voice was even. The system is flagging your seat assignment. My seat is 1A, first class. I booked it 4 days ago through my assistant. Patricia's mouth tightened at the corners. The system, she said again, as if repeating it would make it more true, is flagging the assignment. I need to verify it manually. She turned to the gate computer and typed something, then stopped, then typed something else. The line behind Marcus was backing up now, that particular low-frequency tension that builds when something unexplained is happening at the front and everyone can feel it, but no one can see it. Marcus waited. He was good at waiting. He had learned in conference rooms and boardrooms and on corners in Manhattan 30 years ago when cabs slowed down and then sped up when they saw his face. That patience was not the same as acceptance. It was strategy. Patricia turned back. Sir, she said, and the word carried the same weight it always did when spoken in that tone. Our premium cabins have a presentation standard. I'm concerned that your current attire may not meet that standard. Marcus was quiet for a moment, not from shock. He had been through versions of this before. The shock had burned off a long time ago, replaced by something clearer and colder. He looked at her steadily. Skylink Airlines has no dress code for its premium cabin. That policy doesn't exist. It is at the discretion of gate personnel. It is not. His voice had dropped, not in volume, but in register. My ticket is valid. My passport is valid. There is no dress code. My behavior has been nothing but respectful. I would like to board my flight. Something shifted in her face. It was subtle and it was fast. The flicker of someone who has been contradicted in their own kingdom. She drew herself up a fraction of an inch. Around them, the terminal moved and breathed its ordinary morning life, indifferent to what was happening at gate B42. I am the final authority at this gate, she said, and in my professional judgment, you are currently unfit to fly. Your demeanor presents a potential security concern. I am denying you boarding on flight 880. The words land in the gate area like something dropped from a height. Unfit to fly. 3 words. The kind of phrase that carried legal and medical and personal weight all at once. The kind of phrase designed to reduce a person to something manageable and dismissible. The kind of phrase that worked almost always because the person on the receiving end had too much to lose by fighting it in public. Marcus Webb did not move. He looked at Patricia Hollis with a stillness that had nothing performative about it. He timed nothing about it. He saw past the uniform. He saw a woman whose certainty about who people were and what they deserved had calcified over years into something that looked like authority, but was actually just cruelty with a lanyard. You are making a monumental mistake, he said, quietly, not as a threat, as a fact. The only mistake I could make, she said, her voice taking on a fine, hard edge, would be letting you on this plane. She gestured to 2 approaching security officers. Step aside, sir. He stepped aside. He did not argue further. He did not raise his voice. He picked up his carry-on and walked out of the boarding line with the measured, deliberate calm of a man who had already decided what came next. Behind him, the jet bridge door was beginning to close. The final call for Flight 880 echoed through the terminal. Marcus Webb was not thinking about the merger document. He was not thinking about Carter Hughes or the European logistics market or the 6 months of work evaporating in front of him. He was thinking about a pen, not the one in his carry-on, a different pen entirely, the one he kept in his top desk drawer in Manhattan, the one with his name on the barrel, the one he used for documents that mattered. The battle at gate B42 was over. The war had just begun. The presidential suite at the O'Hare Hilton occupied the top floor of the hotel with the quiet confidence of a space that expected to be taken seriously. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the runways, where planes taxied and climbed in their endless mechanical ballet. Marcus Webb stood at the glass for exactly 30 seconds, watching in particular and said nothing in particular, before he turned away and sat down in the chair by the desk. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water from the bar cart. He watched the bubbles rise to the surface and disappear. He did this until the tight wire in his chest loosened by exactly 1 degree. Then he picked up his phone. His first call was not to a lawyer. It was not to a public relations firm or a journalist or a congressman. It was to Richard Cole, Chief Operating Officer of Webb Equity Group, and the one human being on earth who had known Marcus Webb since for the firm, before the money, before the reputation that now preceded him into every room he entered. Richard answered on the second ring. You're calling from a hotel. I won't make London number. Change of plans. A pause. I was denied boarding. A pause. Richard was quiet for a moment in a particular way that meant he was processing, not shocked. Incident or mechanical? Neither. 8D. Marcus set his water glass down. A gate manager at B42, Skylink Airlines. She told me I was unfit to fly. Another pause, longer this time, the kind that held weight. Walk me through it. Not with outrage, not with heat. With the same detached precision he used when presenting an acquisition target to a board of directors, he described Patricia Hollis and her posture and her tone, the invented dress code. The phrase itself delivered at volume in front of a line of 24 people. He described the young gate agent off to the side whose face had gone white. He described the way the security officers had appeared. He described his own exit, unhurried, and the sound of the jet bridge closing behind him. When he finished, Richard said nothing for 4 seconds. What do you want to do? He asked B. The question was framed with care, which was why Marcus had called him first. I want to understand the full scope of the liability, Marcus said. Pull everything you can on a gate manager at O'Hare, Patricia Hollis. Full employment history. Performance review every complaint ever filed against her with Skylink or any previous carrier. Use Clearview for the secondary search. I want it comprehensive, and I want it by morning. Done. B. Richard's voice had shifted into the register he used when something had moved from personal to operational. The London meeting. Patch me in via secure video. Tell Carter Hughes I've been detained by a personnel matter stateside. B. We proceed as planned, just remotely. A beat and Richard. Be discreet. This stays between us until I know what we're dealing with. The call ended. B. Marcus sat in the quiet of the hotel suite and looked at the city beyond the glass. B. Back at gate B42, Patricia Hollis was in the middle of writing her incident report on the gate terminal. B. And she was finding the work satisfying in the particular way that assembling a narrative always was when you controlled the pen. She described the passenger as agitated and non-compliant. B. She described his affect as hostile and his behavior as confrontational. She described herself as a calm professional exercising sound judgment in a potentially volatile situation. B. She omitted the dress code she had invented. B. She omitted the tone she had used. She omitted the moment when the man had looked at her with a stillness she was not going to think about because there was no useful way to put that in a report. That was impressive, Sandra Flynn said, appearing at her elbow. Sandra had 15 years on the line and had spent most of them cheerfully validating the opinions of whoever she was standing next to. The way you handled that. B. Not everyone would have the backbone. Someone has to maintain standards, Patricia said without looking up from the screen. First class or not, the rules apply to everyone. 10 feet away, Tyler Grant was restocking the boarding pass scanner with paper and trying to make himself as small as possible in the way that young people learn to do when they worked for people like Patricia Hollis. He was 26 years old and 8 months into this job, and he had spent enough of those months watching Patricia work to know exactly what had just happened. He had also spent enough of them watching what happened to junior agents who said the wrong thing to understand his options. His mother was in a skilled nursing facility in Skokie. The bills ran to $4,000 a month after insurance. He still had $60,000 in student loans from his accounting degree, which he had not yet figured out how to use in a job that didn't require it. He was not going to say anything. He rolled the receipt onto a spindle and kept his eyes on the machine and told himself that the passenger would file a formal complaint and the system would handle it, and that was what the system was for. He did not quite believe it. 3 hours later, a system-generated complaint notification from Skylink's automated passenger relations module landed in the inbox of James Caldwell, CEO of Summit Airlines Group. Routed there by the flag his assistant had set for any first-class incidents originating at O'Hare. Caldwell glanced at it between meetings. The name Marcus Webb meant nothing to him. He started composing a brief forwarding note to the regional VP for customer experience. His phone rang before he could finish the sentence. The caller ID showed a name he had not expected to see on a Tuesday afternoon. He set the forward note aside and answered. James Caldwell had been running Summit Airlines Group for 11 years and had developed over that time a finely calibrated internal alarm for the exact quality of silence that preceded catastrophe. Was silence of a room that had just had all the silence sucked out of it. It was not tiling, sucked out of it. The call from Richard Cole, COO of Webb Equity Group, produced exactly that silence inside his own chest. Mr. Coles, he said, this is unexpected. He managed to keep his voice inside the range that qualified as corporate warmth. Greg. Richard did not bother with Caldwell's title or the pleasantries they had exchanged at investor dinners. We have a significant problem, It involves the treatment of one of my colleagues at your O'Hare terminal this morning. A brief pause, precise as a scalpel. B. A colleague who happens to be the founder and chief executive of this firm. The world did a small, slow rotation. Caldwell looked at his screen. The complaint notification was still open. B. First class passenger at gate B42. Skylink flight 880 to London. The name in the complaint field, Marcus Webb. He had started to forward it to regional customer experience without reading it properly. B. He had been in a meeting about runway capacity at Dallas-Fort Worth. B. And the notification had been a 2-second interruption between agenda items. He read it now, quickly, with the specific focus that comes from understanding the stakes have changed completely. B. I'm pulling up the incident now, he said. Stalling was not the right word for what he was doing. He was assembling information as fast as he could, which was something different and more urgent. B. You should also pull up the security footage from gate B42 at approximately 7:10 a.m., Richard said. The audio is quite clear. He let that sit for a moment. A Skylink gate manager told Mr. Webb that in her professional judgment, he was, quote, unfit to fly. She denied him boarding on flight 880. She fabricated a company policy to justify the action, and when Mr. Webb calmly disputed it, she escalated to a security removal. B. Caldwell felt the particular cold that moved through the body when the gap between what you were hoping something was, B, and what it actually turned out to be became impossible to bridge. He had hoped this was a customer complaint about a delayed bag or a rude interaction that could be resolved with an apology and travel vouchers. He had hoped the name in the complaint field was a coincidence. He had the span of approximately 4 seconds, and all of them had just collapsed. Mr. Cole, he started. Mr. Richard's voice was Caldwell. Richard's voice was not raised. It was perfectly controlled. And that was what made it effective. Our firm made a significant investment in your parent company last year. That investment represented a vote of confidence in Summit Airlines Group at a time when your quarterly numbers were not inspiring that confidence in other quarters. I trust you understand the relational context here. He understood it. Webb Equity Group had come in when the stock was underwater, and the board was fielding calls from hedge funds that wanted to break the company apart for parts. Their investment had been the signal that had steadied the market. Without it, Caldwell was not certain he would still have a company to run. I want to be absolutely clear, Caldwell said. This is indefensible. What you're describing is a complete failure on our part, and I am personally horrified. I'm glad to hear it. What are you going to do about it, B? The question had the structure of a simple inquiry and the weight of something much larger. Caldwell had spent enough time in rooms with investors to know that what are you going to do about it translated in this context to convince me right now that you are in control of this and that it will not happen again, and that the value we have parked in this company is not sitting next to a lit match. B. The gate manager in question is going to face an immediate review, Caldwell said. I'm initiating a full internal investigation. I now have Dennis Barrett, our SVP for North American Operations, on a plane to Chicago this afternoon. I want the regional HR director in that room delegated. This will be handled at the store, Richard said. I'd also suggest you look at the full employee, not yesterday's e-file, not just yesterday's incident. B. Our own due diligence this morning uncovered a pattern that your own HR department may have missed or may have declined to act on. Either possibility concerns the people at this firm. Caldwell's hand had tightened around the phone without him noticing. I'll be in touch, Richard continued. Mr. Webb is a reasonable person. He is not, however, a patient one when it comes to systemic failures. 24 hours, Greg. B. I'd like to be able to tell our board that the right actions were taken promptly. The line went to silence. Caldwell sat at his desk for a long moment. He looked out at the Atlanta skyline and thought about a gate manager at O'Hare, whose name he had never heard before who had walked into work this morning with no awareness that she was about to become the most expensive decision his company had ever made. B. She had been thinking about whatever she always thought about. She had been doing what she always did. She had simply, on this particular morning, done it to the wrong person. The thought that followed that one was harder and stayed longer. How many other people had she done it to? People who did not have the resources to make a phone call that would end up on Caldwell's desk. B. People for whom the incident would remain exactly what she intended it to be, which was nothing. He picked up his phone and dialed Dennis Barrett. The instructions he gave were short and precise. Get to Chicago. B. Get Patricia Hollis in a conference room. Get the regional HR director in the room with you. Have legal standing by. And get the security footage from B42 transferred to his laptop before the end of business. B. His second call went to Richard Cole's voicemail. B. He left a message confirming the actions he had taken and a timeline. He kept his voice measured and his language specific because this was not a call where imprecision was survivable. When he ended the call, he stood at the window for a moment and watched a plane arc upward from the runway below, climbing fast, the undercarriage folding away clean. He thought about Marcus Webb, flying commercially by choice, which was itself a story he was only beginning to understand. A man worth more than this entire building, standing in a boarding line with a carry-on bag, reading merger documents, expecting nothing unusual, and getting something that would have broken a lesser person. He thought about that, and then he made himself stop thinking about it, because what he needed now was not empathy. It was execution. He started writing the briefing notes for Dennis Barrett. The 34th floor of the Webb Equity Group building in Midtown Manhattan offered a view of Central Park that changed with the light throughout the day. At 10 in the morning, it was gold and green and the kind of beautiful that people who worked in buildings like this stopped seeing after a year. Marcus Webb had stopped seeing it years ago. He was looking at different kind of landscape entirely. The London meeting was running on a holographic display at the far end of the conference room. Carter Hughes and his team projected at life size from a glass office 12 blocks from the team. Marcus negotiated the terms of the Sterling Meridian Logistics merger. With his characteristic precision, his voice calm, and his mind operating on the problem in front of him the way it always did, which was fully and without sentiment. The other people on the call had no way of knowing that the man commanding the room had, 3 hours earlier, been declared unfit to occupy a seat on a commercial airplane. He had learned a long time ago that compartmentalization was not a coping mechanism. It was a skill. In the adjacent office behind glass walls that looked out over the same park, Marcus had stopped seeing. Richard Cole was running a different meeting. They took B. He sat at the head of a smaller table with two of the firm's senior in-house attorneys and a woman named Janet Morris from Clearview Group, B, the corporate investigations firm that Webb Equity kept on retainer for situations that required the kind of research that did not appear in public filings. B. Janet had a laptop open and a second monitor beside it, and the expression of someone who had delivered difficult findings before and had learned to do it without editorial. B. The file on Patricia Hollis was thicker than Richard had expected when he gave the instruction the previous evening. Walk me through it, Richard said. Janet clicked a key, and the monitor populated with a timeline. B. Patricia Hollis, 49 years old, grew up in central Illinois. Started in the airline industry 25 years ago with Midway as a ticket counter agent. Moved to Continental after Midway's closure. B. Joined Skylink Airlines 9 years ago after the merger with Regional Connect. B. Promoted to gate manager at O'Hare 4 years ago. She paused to let that baseline settle. On the surface, her official record's adequate. Consistent performance reviews. No formal disciplinary actions. That's the surface, B. Richard said. Yes. Janet clicked again. We looked at the informal record. Passenger complaints submitted through online forms, filed with the airline's customer relations department, B, and sent by letter to the Better Business Bureau or the Department of Transportation. B. Complaints that were either dismissed without formal action, resolved with travel vouchers, or simply never followed up on. The next slide was a list. 18 months ago, a Sikh man named Gurpreet Singh filed a complaint stating that a gate manager at O'Hare had subjected him to additional screening and held him aside at gate B42 after he had already cleared TSA pre-check. E. The stated reason in the official report, bulky headwear presenting a potential obstruction of visual identification. The complaint was reviewed and closed. Singh received a credit of $300 toward future flight. 14 months ago, a family of 4 from Buenos Aires filed a complaint. Marta and Ernesto Delgado and their 2 adult Chicano children had been traveling from Chicago to Cancun for a family reunion. At gate B42, the gate manager accused them of feigning limited English comprehension to avoid paying overweight baggage fees on a checked bag. They were removed from the boarding area and missed their flight. Their daughter's quinceañera, which the flight was for, had already taken place by the time they rebooked. The complaint received a $200 voucher and a form letter. 8 months ago, a 23-year-old music student named Alia Reeves had been traveling from Chicago to New York with a cello she had paid the full carry-on surcharge to bring on board. At gate B42, the gate manager declared the instrument an obstruction hazard and required it to be checked as cargo. The cello, an instrument Reeves's late grandmother had given her, worth approximately $45,000, sustained significant damage in transit. The complaint was reviewed. The airline offered to reimburse $2,000. Reeves's attorney had filed a notice of intent to pursue, which was still pending. Richard read all of it without expression. The attorneys on either side of him were taking notes. In each case, Janet said the official incident report filed by the gate manager described the passenger as the source of the problem, our uncooperative belligerent, presenting a security concern. In each case, the complaint was reviewed by HR and either dismissed or resolved at minimum cost. She clicked to the last page in the section. Last year, Patricia Hollis received a commendation from regional management for operational efficiency. Her gate was consistently in the top tier for on-time boarding. The commendation letter noted her commitment to procedure and her decisive handling of difficult passengers. The room was quiet. "She is a bully," Richard said finally. His voice was controlled, and the control itself was what made it angry. "She targets people she perceives as other, as powerless, as unlikely to be believed or to fight back. And the airline has not just tolerated this for years. They have rewarded her for it." "There's one more thing," Janet said. She clicked to a final document. "This is Tyler Grant, 26, junior gate agent. He submitted a statement to Skylink's internal review office this morning. Voluntarily. He described what he witnessed at gate B42 yesterday. His account matches the security footage in every material detail." Richard looked at the document. He knows who was involved. His statement was filed before Skylinks made any contact with him. He did not know the passenger department when he submitted it. Janet paused. He just knew she was wrong. Richard sat back and looked at the window and the park beyond it. In the next room, Marcus had concluded the London meeting and was sitting in the same chair, the same calm, a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. He had called through to Richard and was waiting for the briefing. Richard stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked next door with the file under his arm. He set it on the table in front of Marcus and sat down. "It's worse than yesterday," he said. "Not much worse, but worse." Marcus looked at the file and did not open it yet. "Tell me," Richard told him. James Caldwell opened the security file at 11:47 a.m. Central Time, sitting alone in his corner office in Atlanta, with the door closed and a cup of coffee he had not touched going cold on the credenza behind him. The footage was from 4 cameras at gate B42, and it had been compiled and synced and sent to him by the airline's security operations director within 2 hours. of his request. The audio quality was a surprise. He had expected the ambient muffled sound of a crowded terminal. What he got was clean and close, the result of the directional microphones the airline had installed at gate podiums 3 years ago to capture verbal confirmation of boarding procedures. He watched the full 9 minutes. He watched Patricia Hollis scan Marcus Webb from shoes to hood in the 2 seconds. Before she asked for his identification. He watched the posture, the tilt of the chin, the particular set of the mouth that meant something had already been decided. He watched her hold the passport open for longer than any verification ever required. He heard his own airline's gate manager tell a passenger that the premium cabin had a dress code in a voice that did not waver because she believed it completely in the moment she was saying it. The way people believe things they have just invented. He watched Marcus Webb respond to every escalation with the same unhurried composure, the kind of composure that costs something. He heard the phrase come out of Patricia Hollis's mouth. In my professional judgment, you are currently unfit to fly. Clear as a bell, on camera, in front of witnesses, with no evidentiary basis whatsoever. Caldwell sat for a moment after the footage ended and looked at the wall. Then he picked up his phone and called Dennis Barrett. Dennis Barrett was 54 years old and had spent most of his career at Summit Airlines Group, solving operational problems of the kind that had no clean solution. He had handled runway incidents and crew disputes and weather crises and the slow administrative disasters that came from managing 60,000 employees across 400 locations. He had flown into Chicago on the first available flight out of Atlanta, and was in a rental car heading north on I-190 when Caldwell called. I've seen the footage, Caldwell said without opening. It's as bad as Richard Cole described. Worse, because you can see her face the entire time. Regional HR is already in the building, Dennis said. Margaret Chen. She drove in from downtown. We've got a conference room reserved. Legal will be on a video line. A pause. Patricia Hollis is on shift. She's been in a training session with new hires all morning. She doesn't know anything is happening. Nothing. As of 2 hours ago, she was running the new hire orientation and apparently doing it with considerable enthusiasm. Caldwell thought about that for a moment, the ordinary human texture of it. A woman walking into a building this morning with no more awareness of what was coming for her than a person has of any ordinary Tuesday. Teaching other people how to do the job she believed she was very good at. Handle it properly, Caldwell said, by the book, every step. I don't want an employment lawyer getting a procedural foothold. Understood. And Dennis, the Clearview file that Richard Cole's office sent over this morning, the pattern of complaints. I've read it. That's on the table, too. This isn't one incident. Make sure she understands that. He ended the call. In the gate agent break room at Terminal 3, Patricia Hollis was finishing her coffee and reviewing the afternoon's flight schedule with the administrative satisfaction of a person who ran their section of the operation with precision. The new hires had been attentive this morning, which she found gratifying. It confirmed what she had always believed, which was that most people, given clear expectations and firm guidance, would rise to meet them. Don Pierce, her direct supervisor, appeared in the doorway. He was a mild-mannered man with the slightly haunted look of someone who had managed to avoid conflict for so long that conflict now seemed to him like a personal attack. He looked at Patricia and then at his shoes and then at Patricia again. Patricia, there's a situation in the regional office. She put down her coffee. What situation? Dennis Barrett is here. From corporate. He kept his eyes somewhere near her shoulder. He's asking me. She felt something move through her, swift and warm. Dennis Barrett was the senior vice president of North American operations. He was 7 levels above her in the organizational chart. People at that level did not fly to Chicago on short notice to deliver negative news. They did it by phone, or they sent the regional manager. When they came in person, it meant something significant. It meant they wanted to look at you directly when they said what they had to say. She smoothed down her blazer. She ran a hand along the edge of her collar. She stood up straight, which she always did, but now with an additional degree of intention. All right, she said. Give me a minute. She went to the mirror in the hallway and checked her reflection. Professional, put together. The kind of person who made difficult decisions calmly and without apology. The kind of person who on even a guinea of given day might be the subject of commendation. B. She walked toward the regional administrative wing with the measured pace of a person who was in no hurry because the situation was already going her way. Down this corridor, past the operations board, past the small offices where regional logistics and scheduling worked their spreadsheets. The door to the main conference room was 3 people were seated at the conference table. Dennis Barrett sat at the head. Margaret Chen, head of regional HR, whom Patricia knew only from annual compliance trainings, sat to his right. To his left was a man Patricia did not recognize in a dark suit with a laptop open in front of him and a slightly removed expression of someone attending a meeting in an observer capacity. There was a large television on the wall. It was dark. No one smiled. Miss Hollis, Dennis Barrett said. Please sit down. She sat. Something had shifted in the temperature of the room. She could feel it now, the way you feel air pressure change before a storm, a subtle compression that the body registers before the mind catches up. We're here to discuss an incident that occurred yesterday morning at Gate B42 during the boarding of Skylink Flight 880, Barrett said. Patricia straightened in her chair. Yes, I filed a complete incident report. The passenger was non-compliant and presented a security concern. I exercised my authority as gate manager in accordance with standard protocol. Dennis Barrett held up one hand, a single controlled gesture, and the room became very quiet. We have your report, Miss Hollis, he said. We also have this. He picked up a remote control from the table and aimed it at the television on the wall. The screen came to life. The footage ran for 9 minutes and 11 seconds. Patricia Hollis watched all of it. She watched herself scan Marcus Webb from the bottom of his shoes to the top of his hoodie in the first 2 seconds of their interaction. She watched herself take his passport and hold it open at an angle that had nothing to do with verification and everything to do with scrutiny. She heard her own voice, recorded cleanly, and played back in a room where there was nowhere to look but the screen, announced that the premium cabin had a dress code. She had believed that in the moment. She said it with the complete certainty of someone who had never questioned their own authority. Watching herself say it now in this room was like watching someone else sleepwalk. She heard Marcus Webb's voice, calm and precise, tell her the policy didn't exist. She watched herself escalate. She watched him hold still while she moved. She watched other passengers in the background, beginning to stare, the small private theater of public judgment forming around the two of them, and she did not like the version of this story that she was watching, because the version she had lived was different, sharper, more justified, and this version was not that. And then she heard herself say it. In my professional judgment, you are currently unfit to fly. The words came out of the speaker and settled over the table like a chemical, and the room became very still. The screen went dark. Dennis Barrett set the remote down. He was looking at her with the expression of a person who has reached a decision and is now in the process of delivering its consequences. It was not anger exactly. It was something more deliberate than anger. Your report, he said, describes an agitated and hostile passenger. The footage describes the opposite. You were the aggressor. You fabricated a company policy. You abused the authority of your position. You publicly humiliated a first-class passenger in front of a boarding queue on the basis of criteria that exist nowhere in Skylink Airlines policy. He paused, and when the passenger calmly and accurately corrected your fabricated policy, you escalated to a security threat assessment. Patricia's face was warm. Her hands, flat hands, are not steady when the way running ahead of the mind, when the body is running ahead of the mind. They took a She had been in difficult conversations before, many of them, and she had always had the advantage of the official version, the one she controlled, because she was the one who wrote the reports. This was different. This was the version that had been recorded before she could write anything. Her voice a judgment out thinner than she intended. I have been with this airline for 9 years. I have been impeccable record. I have an impeccable record. B. Margaret Chen spoke for the first time. Her voice was measured and precise. Do you know who the passenger was, Miss Hollis? Patricia shook her head. Some passenger with an attitude. The silence that followed was brief and total. The passenger was Marcus Webb, Dennis Barrett said. He let the name sit for a moment, watching her face. It showed him nothing. He continued. He is the founder and chief executive of Webb Equity Group, a private equity firm that is currently one of the largest single investors in Summit Airlines Group. Our parent company. Another pause. In practical terms, Miss Hollis, the man you publicly declared unfit to fly is, for all meaningful purposes, one of the people who signed the checks that pay our salaries, including mine, including yours. The color left her face in a way that was almost physical, as if something had been poured out. She thought of the email headers she had deleted without reading. Last year, the company-wide announcements about a new strategic investment partner, the press releases that had populated her inbox and which she had moved to trash because she was a gate manager in Chicago. And whatever happened at the board level in Atlanta had nothing to do with the work she did had blacked her at the end of the incident. She thought of the way Marcus Webb had looked at her at the end of the incident. That particular stillness, the words he had delivered with quiet precision. You are making a monumental mistake, not a threat, a statement of fact. Delivered by a person who knew exactly what he was and exactly what that meant, and who had chosen, for reasons she did not understand, not to invoke it in the moment. He could have named himself. He could have told her who he was, and the entire encounter would have dissolved in an instant. He had not done that. She understood, only now, what that choice had cost him and what it meant. I didn't know, she said. The words were pathetic, and she knew it even as she said them, and that, Dennis Barrett said, is exactly the problem. He reached forward and pulled a thick folder from beside his elbow. He slid it across the table toward her. She did not pick it up immediately. She looked at it the way you look at something you already know is going to confirm a thing you have been trying not to know. Open it, he said. She did. The first page was a complaint summary from Gurpreet Singh, dated 18 months ago. She remembered it vaguely. A difficult passenger. Headwear that had made her uneasy. She had followed her instincts, and her report had closed the matter. The second page was the Delgado family. She remembered them better. The language barrier, the baggage dispute, the removal. They had missed some family event. She had noted in her report that they became verbally aggressive when asked to comply with baggage policy. The third page was Alia Reeves and the cello. She remembered the cello. It was too large, or she had decided it was too large, and the instrument had been damaged in transit, and there had been a lawyer involved. She had written in her report that the passenger was uncooperative and refused to comply with standard carry-on regulations. She turned the pages slowly. Her hands were no longer just unsteady. They were cold. She had told herself each time that she was doing her job, maintaining standards, protecting the integrity of the boarding process. She had written the reports, and the reports had backed her up, and the passengers had received vouchers and gone away, and the matter had been resolved, which meant, in her professional understanding, that it had been handled correctly. Looking at the stack of paper now, looking at all of them together in a sequence, she saw for the first time what it looked like from outside her own certainty, and it looked like something she did not want to recognize as herself. Skylink Airlines is terminating your employment. Effective immediately, Margaret Chen said. Her voice did not change and register. It was a formal statement delivered in a formal tone, and its formality was its own kind of cruelty. You will be escorted from the premises. Your personal belongings will be returned to you by security. Your final paycheck will be processed and mailed within 14 business days. B. Patricia Hollis sat in the chair and did not move. The kingdom of Gate B42, which she had ruled for 4 years, with the absolute conviction of someone who believed their power was legitimate and permanent, he had just been dissolved, and in the dissolution, she saw it for the first time as it actually was. B. Not a kingdom at all. A booth at the end of a corridor, a clipboard, a set of credentials that had now been revoked. She had been the one deciding who was fit to fly. Now she was the one who had been judged. The news reached Marcus Webb at 3:52 in the afternoon. Richard walked into the corner office without knocking, which was the only time he ever walked into any room without knocking, and set a single sheet of paper on the desk. Wexler confirmed it. She's been terminated. Barrett is on his way back to Atlanta. Marcus nodded once. He was sitting in his chair with his jacket off. The city below him beginning its afternoon light shift, the buildings catching the sun at an angle that made them look briefly like something else, like distance rather than architecture. The London deal had closed 2 hours ago. Carter Hughes had sent a brief message, clean and done. See you in the spring. The European logistics market had been reshaped while Marcus Webb sat in the Manhattan conference room, 6 hours behind the clock, which was, he supposed, the only upside of not being on the plane. On his desk, among the familiar topography of financial reports and briefing packets, lay a document he had not yet opened. It had arrived by encrypted courier from James Caldwell's office in Atlanta. It was slim, 4 pages, with a cover note that said only, per our conversation, and Richards, I believe this is the appropriate next step. Richard sat down in the chair across the desk. He was quiet, which he rarely was, and the quiet told Marcus this was one of the moments Richard was giving him room to think before speaking. Marcus reached forward and picked up the document. It was a shareholder acknowledgement of incident, drafted jointly by the legal descent of both Summit Airlines Group and Webb Equity Group. It summarized the incident at Gate B42, noted the internal investigation's findings, and documented the remedial actions taken by Summit Airlines Group, including the immediate dismissal of the employee responsible. It included a formal apology from the Summit board to Marcus Webb and to Webb Equity Group. Caldwell had signed it. The signature was on the 3rd page, neat and a little stiff. The signature of a man who had spent 2 days trying to control a situation he had not seen coming. The final line was for Marcus. His signature was not legally required. The dismissal had already happened. The investigation had already concluded. Caldwell had already acted. But politically, as a matter of public record, and as a signal to the investment community by Sid Garistes and Detroit, and to anyone else watching how this had been handled, his signature meant something. It was the aggrieved party closing the loop. It was the confirmation that this action had been sufficient, that the relationship between Webb Equity Group and Summit Airlines Group remained intact, and that the matter was resolved. It was the paper that ended it, the paper that, in a way, had always been the point. He uncapped the pen, a heavy instrument, perfectly weighted, with his name on the barrel, the one he kept in the top drawer for documents that mattered. He did not sign immediately. He thought about Patricia Hollis, not the gate manager, not the uniform, but the person. 49 years old, 25 years in this industry, starting at a ticket counter in Illinois when she was 24. She probably had a mortgage, maybe a pension she had been contributing to, maybe people who depended on her in the ordinary, complicated way that people depend on each other. Her career in aviation was over now, not just at Skylink, but industry-wide, because these things traveled through professional networks the way certain kinds of information always did, and no carrier would touch someone associated with this incident. He thought about what the next year of her life was going to look like. Probably some of it. He allowed himself that. He was not made of stone, And then he thought about Gurpreet Singh, who had already cleared security, and had been held aside at the gate because of his turban, and who had received a $300 travel credit as compensation for being treated as a suspect in his own country. He thought about the Delgado family in Buenos Aires, who had come to watch their daughter graduate from college and missed the flight because Patricia Hollis had decided they were pretending not to understand her. He thought about Aaliyah Reeves and the cello her grandmother had given her, now damaged in a cargo hold, and the lawsuit still pending, and the gap between what the cello had cost and what airline had offered to pay for it. He thought about Tyler Grant, 26 years old, standing at the gate podium with receipt paper in his hands, knowing exactly what was happening and what it meant, and saying nothing because he had done the calculation, and the calculation came out on the wrong side, and Marcus could not blame him for that because he had been 26 years old once, and he had done the same calculation himself in different rooms. His signature was not for him. He was clear about that. For himself, the matter had been settled the moment he stepped out of the boarding line. The personal ledger was closed. What the pen was for now, what the act of signing meant, was something larger and more impersonal and more important. It was an acknowledgement from a position of power, and in the language that power used, that what had happened was wrong, not just wrong to him, which was the easy part, but wrong in a systemic way, in the way that things are wrong when an institution has decided that certain people's dignity is not worth the administrative cost of protecting it. He put the pen to the paper. The signature came out clean and deliberate. Marcus Webb. 2 words. The ink dried fast on the thick stock. He closed the folder and pushed it across the desk. Send it back to Caldwell, he said, and tell him I want a draft of a formal cultural initiative plan on my desk by Monday. Training protocol, complaint escalation, frontline employee support. He can bring in whoever he needs to bring in. I'll send Richard to the first meeting. A pause, and tell him this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. Richard picked up the folder. He looked at Marcus for a moment with the particular expression he wore when he had something to say and was deciding whether the moment called for it. He decided it did not. He stood up and walked out with the folder under his arm. Marcus turned back to the window. The sun had dropped below the line of buildings to the west, and the city had shifted into its evening registers. The lights beginning to come up below, a field of them stretching to the horizon in every direction. He looked at it without seeing it, the way he always did when he was thinking about what came next, which was always, because the next thing was always there waiting for him to turn toward it. He had won. He knew that. He had used his position to remove a person who had abused hers, and he had done it cleanly and proportionately and without self-pity. But winning, he had learned a long time ago, was the smallest part of the work. The work was what you built after. He picked up his phone and sent a message to his assistant. Schedule a call with Richard Monday morning. Before the call bell, the gateway briefing. I want to talk about the gateways model. He put the phone down. The city went on below him, indifferent and enormous, full of people making their daily calculations about what to say swallow and whose was safe to trust. Among them somewhere was Tyler Grant, heading home on a Plitz bus from the airport, probably still uncertain about whether the statement he had submitted that morning was going to cost him or protect him. Seth was going to protect him. Marcus would make sure of that. In the same way, he made sure of all the other things that needed making sure of, quietly, through structure and incentive and a careful construction of systems that rewarded the right behavior instead of punishing it. He owed Tyler Grant that much. He owed all of them that much. The pen was back in the top drawer. The real work was just beginning. Patricia Hollis was escorted out of O'Hare International Airport at 4:17 in the afternoon with a cardboard box and a badge she was no longer authorized to carry. The box contained a coffee mug, a framed photograph of her cat, 2 pens she had always preferred over the ones the airline supplied, and a small planner in which she had written the flight schedule for the coming month. She carried it to her car in the employee parking structure without making eye contact with anyone she passed, which required effort because she had worked at this airport for 9 years and knew everyone who worked the afternoon shift in Terminal 3. The first thing she did when she got home was call a lawyer. The lawyer listened to her account for 40 minutes and asked several questions that she answered carefully, and then asked to check the name of the investor involved. And when she told him, he was quiet for a moment, and he then said he did not think he was the right fit for this matter. The second lawyer she called said something similar. The third asked a few more questions, and no employment attorney he knew would take a case against a company with the financial and legal resources of Webb Equity Group standing behind it, not with the footage as described, not with the history of complaints on file. He said it not unkindly, and she hated him for it. She filed for unemployment benefits. The claim was contested by the airline's legal department on the grounds of misconduct, which meant the first payment took 11 weeks to arrive. She applied to every major carrier she could find: United, American, Delta, Southwest, JetBlue, Spirit, which she had always considered beneath her. None of them called back. A recruiter she had worked with twice over the years, a woman named Carol, who had placed her at Skylink years ago and sent a card every Christmas, went to voicemail the first time and did not return the second call or the third. A colleague she asked for a reference, a man she had worked alongside for 6 years, stammered something about being in the middle of something and hung up. She understood eventually what had happened. The story had moved through the industry the way stories move through industries, which was comprehensively and permanently. She did not know how much of it was the Clearview dossier and how much was simply people talking. But the result was the same. The aviation door had closed. Her severance covered 2 months, her savings, which she had always intended to build, but had never quite gotten to because there was always something, covered 2 more. In the 5th month, she fell behind on the mortgage. In the 6th, she received a notice. In the 7th, she accepted what the notice meant and called a real estate attorney and began the process of selling the house in the way that distressed sales go, which is to say quickly and at a loss. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex off the I-294 where the windows faced a sound wall and the carpet in the hallways smelled permanently of something she could not identify. The rent was $950 a month, which was manageable if she was careful. She sold the SUV. She started taking the bus. The job at Freshmart came through a temp agency after she had submitted 31 applications to positions in retail customer service and administrative support. Most did not respond. A few conducted phone screens and which went quiet. Freshmart needed cashiers for the holiday rush and then kept her on. The uniform was a polyester polo shirt in a shade of green that served no one and an apron with the store logo on the bib. The name badge had her first name in cheerful block letters, which felt like a small continuous joke. She worked register 12, which was at the end of the main lane row, next to the self-checkout machines. 8-hour shifts, the beep of the scanner, the fluorescent light, the customers who loaded their items onto the belt in a jumble and looked past her face and said things to each other about prices as if she were not there. Meanwhile, in the 48th floor conference room of the Summit Airlines Group, headquarters in Atlanta, Marcus Webb sat at one end of a long table across from James Caldwell and the full board of directors, and he was not being subtle. This company does not have a customer service problem, he said. It has a power problem. You give your frontline employees a small and specific measure of authority, and you provide them with essentially zero training on how to exercise it with judgment, empathy, or any awareness of the biases they bring to it. The result is a culture where people like Patricia Hollis thrive because the metrics by which you measure success, which is to say on-time boarding and low complaint resolution costs, happen to align with the methods she used. You built a system that rewarded exactly what you should have been preventing. That is not a personnel issue. That is a structural failure. Caldwell did not argue. He had stopped arguing on the second day of these meetings. What he was doing instead was listening, with the careful attention of a man who understood that the alternative to listening was watching his largest investor exit, which would send a signal to every other investor that there was something deeply wrong with this company. There might be. He was beginning to think there probably was. The first pillar of what became known as the Webb Initiative, mandatory, immersive training for every employee at Summit Airlines Group and its subsidiaries. Not a module, not a video. Actual in-person sessions facilitated by behavioral psychologists and cross-cultural communication experts. Using real case studies, including a carefully anonymized recreation of the Gate B-42 incident, structured so that participants experienced the scenario from multiple positions, and could not leave without understanding what it felt like from both sides of the counter. The second pillar, the Clear Sky Protocol, a new complaint management system in which any complaint flagged for discriminatory or abusive conduct was automatically escalated to an independent review board that included outside ethics advisors and had no reporting line to the airline's regional management. The board had binding authority over outcomes. A complaint from a student with a carry-on would receive the same review as a complaint from a Fortune 500 CEO. Caldwell's legal team had pushed back on the independence requirement. Marcus had been unmoved. The third pillar, Gateways, a mentorship and advancement program designed to identify frontline employees who demonstrated integrity and judgment and to provide them with a clear path to leadership. Not just employees who kept things moving on time. Employees who treated every person in their line like a person in their line. Tyler Grant was identified by the regional HR director, Margaret Chin, on the basis of his voluntary statement. He had submitted it before he knew who the passenger was. He had submitted it because he knew what he had seen and what it meant. Margaret noted in her recommendation that he had done this while employed by someone with a documented history of retaliating against a junior staff who crossed her, and that it had taken moral courage that the company had done nothing to make easy for him. Tyler was enrolled in the first Gateways cohort. He completed the first module, then the second, then the third. He was given a supervisory evaluation at the end of the program, then a lead agent position, then a shift supervisor role. The nervous tremor he had carried through his first year at the airport was gone. In its place was something quieter and more durable, the posture of a person who had been told by people with the authority to say it that their instincts were sound. He thought about Patricia Hollis sometimes, not with satisfaction, which would have been too easy, but with the more complicated emotion that comes from watching someone you once feared become someone you felt sorry for in a way you hadn't expected to. He thought about the way he had stood at that podium with a receipt paper and said nothing. He thought about it less than he used to, but he still thought about it. The highlighted came and went, and Freshmark kept Patricia Hollis on in the new year, which she was grateful for in the muted, practical way she had learned to be grateful for things that kept the math working out. Register 12. 8 hours. The beep of the scanner. She had learned by the third month to stop counting how many times to stop counting. She said, "Did you find everything you were looking for?" And to stop thinking about what that question would have meant to her a year ago when she was the one who decided what people were looking for and whether they were permitted to find it. The customers were mostly fine. A few were not. One man, the kind who speaks to service workers with the unconscious authority of someone, and Sabi, who has never had to think about it, handed her a bag of oranges and said, "Is this 1 pound or 2? Can you actually tell the difference?" in a tone that made the question something other than a question. She weighed the bag. She told him. He took it back. Without responding, she thought later about whether she had ever spoken to anyone like that. In that particular tone, the one that turned a person into a function. B. She had never worked retail before. She had been on the other side of the counter her entire adult life, which meant she had done most of her damage on the other side of a podium rather than a register. But she understood now that the mechanism was the same. A small authority over someone who needed something from you and the choice of how to use it. She was making a different choice. It was not a dramatic transformation. B. It was quieter than that and slower, and she was not sure she deserved credit for it because most of what was driving it was embarrassment and exhaustion rather than any genuine change of heart. But she was making it. A Saturday afternoon in February, 3 months into the job, the store was at its peak weekend crowd. Every lane backed up. B. The ambient noise of 100 separate conversations, creating the particular headache that made the end of a Saturday shift feel like the end of something much longer. Patricia's lane had been moving steadily until the woman 3 customers back reached the belt. She was young, maybe 25, with a baby in a carrier strapped to her chest and a toddler in the cart seat, gripping the cart handle with both fists. B. She had a cloth grocery bag full of coupons that she was pulling out by one, cross-referencing them one by one, referencing them against her phone, while the baby fussed and the toddler began to work on getting the cart handle in his mouth. The customers behind her had already started the performance, the shifting of weight, the glances at watches, the theatrical sighs that weren't quite she could not have missed. But where B? Patricia felt the familiar impatience rise in her chest. The line delayed, the way one person's difficulty became everyone else's problem. And then she looked at the woman's face, not her cart, not her coupons, not the time she was consuming. Her face. The woman was looking at her phone with the concentrated focus of someone holding it together by sheer will. The baby beginning to cry now, the toddler making a sound of his own. The coupons not scanning correctly on the first try, and the people behind her making their sounds. And through all of it, the woman's face was very still in the way. Faces go still when they have stopped asking whether things are going to be okay, because the honest answer is not reassuring. Patricia opened her mouth and then closed it. She took the coupon from the woman's hand, tried it herself, looked at the expiration date herself, found the matching item on the belt, and entered the override code. "Take your time," Patricia said. Her voice came out of registers she didn't entirely recognize, lower and slower than the voice she had used at the gate, the voice that was built for authority and efficiency. This was a different voice. She wasn't sure when she had acquired it. "Don't worry about the line." She helped the woman unload the cart while she found the next coupon. She kept the lane moving without making the woman feel like the problem. When the toddler dropped something over the side of the cart, Patricia picked it up without being asked. The woman looked at her, finally, when the transaction was done. The kind of look that happens when someone has been braced for difficulty and received something unexpected instead. "Thank you," she said, quietly, not effusively, just sincerely, which was the kind of thank you that meant something. Patricia watched her push the cart toward the exit and didn't say anything. She turned back to the belt and started scanning for the next customer. She was on her second break of the afternoon, in the back room with a cup of coffee, when Tyler Grant came through her lane. She didn't see him until he put his items on the belt. A bottle of wine, some cheese, a loaf of bread, the kind of purchase a person makes when they're going to someone's house for dinner or having a quiet evening at home. Nice things, the kind of things that cost what they cost because the person buying them is in a place in their life where that's not a number they have to calculate carefully. She looked up and her hands stopped moving. He looked different. The nervous quality she had always read as weakness was gone. He stood the way people stand when they have stopped expecting something bad to happen, which was the same as saying he stood the way she used to stand. Before gate B42, before the conference room, before the cardboard box. He was wearing a Skylink Airlines name badge. supervisor, he recognized her. She could see the moment of it cross his face, a microsecond of adjustment, B. And then his expression settled into something she could not immediately name. It was not satisfaction, B. It was not gloating. It was not the particular brightness that appears in someone's eyes when the person who made them feel small is now smaller. It was grief, almost. The specific sadness of someone who has seen a version of events play out that they didn't want to see, even when they knew it was coming. "Hello, Patricia," he said. She could not find her voice immediately. She picked up the wine bottle and scanned it. Beep. Tyler. B. The word came out fine, just the name, flat and accurate. He paid with a Skylink corporate card. The card had the airline's logo on it, the swooping blue line she had looked at on her own badge every day for 9 years. She processed the transaction. She put his items in a paper bag with the Fresh Mart logo on the side. He took the bag from her, and he paused, and she waited for whatever he was going to do with the pause. She had imagined this moment in the abstract, in the way you imagine collisions you are afraid of. She had imagined it would involve a certain expression, something that would confirm for her all the worst things she feared people were thinking. "I hope you're doing okay," he said. Sincere. The way you say something when you mean it instead of walk to her lane. She met his eyes for the first time since he had walked up to her lane. "I'm managing," she said. The same 2 words she had said to her sister on the phone last week, and to her neighbor, and to anyone who asked. He nodded. He picked up the bag, and then, before he turned, he said something quietly, in the voice of someone who has decided that not saying a thing is its own kind of cost. "He never wanted this to happen to you." "I heard him say it, Mr. Webb." He just wanted things to be better. Then he walked away, toward the automatic doors, out into the gray February afternoon. Patricia stood at register 12 under the fluorescent lights of Fresh Mart and listened to the scanner beep for the next customer and tried to locate what she was feeling. It was not absolution. She did not think she was owed absolution. It was something smaller and harder and maybe more honest. The understanding that the person, who had the power to end her career, had not done it for satisfaction. He had done it because it was the only language the institution understood. He had done it for all the people she had done the same thing to in smaller, quieter ways, across 25 years of deciding who deserved to move through a space without being stopped. She thought about Gurpreet Singh. She thought about the Delgado family. She thought about a young woman and a cello and the sound of a cargo door closing. She thought about all the ordinary people she had sorted into categories and treated accordingly, and never, not once, considered what they went home carrying. The next customer put their items on the belt. Patricia looked up. She smiled, not because she had to, because she was trying to learn what that meant. And the only way to learn it was to keep doing it and see what happened. 6 months after the morning at gate B42, Marcus Webb returned to O'Hare International Airport on a Tuesday in late spring with a carry-on bag and a boarding pass for Skylink Flight 880 to London. He was dressed the way he had been dressed the first time. Dark trousers, a comfortable sweater in charcoal gray, sneakers, the same watch. He had chosen the outfit without thinking about it, the same way he had chosen it 6 months ago, and it was only in the car from the city that he had noticed the parallel and let himself feel the small private significance of it. He was flying commercial again, not as a test this time, not to audit the customer experience from the inside out. He was flying commercial because he had started to believe in what was being built, and because believing in something meant participating in it. Terminal 3 at O'Hare was the same building it had always been, same fluorescent geography, same industrial smell of jet fuel and recycled air, same sound of rolling luggage and departure announcements. But gate B42 looked different. He noticed it first in the agents before he reached the podium. A young woman in a Skylink blazer was crouched beside an elderly man with a cane, helping him manage a document without being asked. A male agent 2 stations over was speaking to a family, in a language Marcus couldn't identify from this distance. The family's body language moving from tight and uncertain to visibly relaxed as the conversation went on. The body language of the queue was different too. Less held in, less braced. The gate manager on duty was a woman in her early 40s named Lorraine, according to her badge, who had been promoted into her role 4 months ago through the Gateways program, and who had been mentioned by Richard in a briefing last month as one of the standout supervisors in the new cohort. She saw Marcus approaching and met him before he reached the podium. "Mr. Webb," she said. Her voice was warm and unperformed. "Welcome back. We have you in 1A this morning. Can I get you anything while you're waiting? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine," he said. "Thank you." He meant the thank you. He meant it for the coffee offer, and also for the greeting, and also for all of it. The whole accumulated ordinary normalcy of being received at a gate like a person who was expected and welcome. He meant it in a way that was hard to explain without textile context he didn't give. Lorraine smiled and moved back to the podium to manage the early boarding. Marcus found a seat near the window with a view of the runway and sat down. A plane was taxiing out to the active, slow, and purposeful. Beyond it, another was on final approach, dropping through a blue-white sky. He thought about what this terminal had been 6 months ago and what it was now, and whether the distance between the two things was as large as it felt. He thought about the Gateways cohort, 42 people in the first class alone, frontline employees across 12 Skylink hubs who had been identified by the new review criteria, and given something the old system had not offered them, which was the possibility of advancement on the basis of being good at the actual job. He thought about Tyler Grant's statement, filed before Tyler knew who had been involved, and kind of cost a 26-year-old with $60,000 in student debt and a mother in a nursing facility. He thought about the Clear Sky Protocol, and the 16 complaints that had been reviewed in the first 3 months under the new system, none of which had been dismissed without independent review, 3 of which had resulted in formal disciplinary actions against airline employees. He thought about Alia Reeves and whether she had gotten her cello repaired, and whether the lawsuit was still pending, and whether there was anything he could do about that specifically without it becoming something other than what it should be. He was still thinking about it when the boarding call for priority passengers came. He stood up and walked to the podium and showed his boarding pass and stepped through the door onto the jet bridge, which smelled of metal and recycled air and the particular warmth of enclosed spaces attached to large machines. He walked the length of it and stepped into the plane and found his seat. 1A, window B, the same seat he had been standing in line to reach 6 months ago. He settled in. He put his bag in the overhead. He took out his pirate bird. He took out his phone and checked the London itinerary, which was for a different set of people about a different set of numbers, the next thing in the long sequence of next things. Vague. The flight attendant who came to check on the first class cabin, before departure, was a woman in her mid-50s, the kind of professional who wore 25 years of this job in the way she moved, efficient and unhurried at the same time. She had the specific competence of someone who has done a thing long enough to understand what actually matters in it. She stopped at his seat, introduced herself as Renee, started the routine inquiry about preferences. Then she was, "Excuse me," she said. "I don't want to interrupt, but I wanted to say something." She looked at him directly, which he appreciated. People who work customer-facing jobs often didn't do that. "I don't know everything about what happened a few months ago. I know some of it from the training and from what colleagues have said. But I know that since the new program started, the way this airline feels to work for has changed. Not the policies exactly. More like the feeling inside the policies. A beat. It sounds vague when I say it out loud." "It doesn't," Marcus said. She nodded, opened her mouth, closed it. "I've been doing this for 25 years. I've worked for 4 carriers. This is the first time I felt like the company actually wants the people on the front lines to succeed at the right things, not just the fast things. She paused again. So, thank you. B. I'm not sure that's the right thing to say, but they didn't want to say. It is the right thing to say, Marcus say nothing. It is the right thing to say, Marcus told her, and thank you for saying it. She moved on. Marcus looked out the window ground, was finishing the last of the departure checks below, a small choreography of people and machines that happened on every flight and that most passengers just didn't watch. He watched it. The pushback from the gate. B. The engines moved from their idle state to something with intention behind it, a rising frequency that he had always found satisfying, the mechanical expression of departure. B. The terminal slid backward through the window as the aircraft turned toward the taxiway. He thought about what it meant to use power well. He had spent 20 years accumulating it, doing the things you do to accumulate it. B. Building a firm, attracting capital, making deals, building a reputation that preceded him into rooms. B. He had used it to create companies, to restructure markets, to produce wealth for investors, and at the larger remove for the people those investments employed. He had not always thought carefully about the other kind of power, the ambient kind, the power that operates in the small interactions, in the gap between the person holding the clipboard and the person who needs to get through the door. B. The power that Patricia Hollis had, which was in some ways the realest and most consequential kind, because it was the kinds that ordinary people felt every day. What he had done at Gate B42, or rather, what he had set in motion as a result of what had happened at Gate B42, was use the large power to protect people from the small power. He was not sure he had done it perfectly. B. He was not sure the outcome was exactly right in all its particulars, but he thought it was the right direction. He thought it was better than what had existed before, and he thought it had the structural bones to keep getting better, which was the most he could say about any system built by fallible people to manage other fallible people. The plane reached the runway. A pause. The engines climbed. The acceleration pressed Marcus back into his seat, quiet and total, and then the wheels left the ground, and the city fell away below. Chicago spreading in every direction, the lake to the east catching the morning light, the highways running spokes from a hub, and then the clouds came. And for a moment there was nothing but gray and the sound of the engines, and then they punched through, and the sky above was blue and clear, and the sun was very bright, and the plane leveled out and aimed itself east toward London. Marcus Webb looked out the window at the sky. Karma was not a lightning bolt. It was the slow accumulation of consequence, the grinding consistency of cause and effect. The way choices comes compound over time until the weight of them becomes impossible to ignore. For Patricia Hollis, that weight had finally fallen. For Tyler Grant, for Lorraine at the gate, for the 42 people in the Gateways program, for the passengers who would be treated differently starting now. The weight had shifted in a different direction. He did not feel triumphant. He felt, if he was honest, something closer to tired in the good way, the way you feel after a thing that needed doing has been done. He had not won a fight. He had changed the conditions under which the fights happened. That was in the end the only thing worth doing with the kind of power he had. Not to win. To change the rules so that fewer people had to fight in the first place. The plane climbed on into the clear, bright morning, and Marcus Webb opened his briefing document and got back to work. If this story made you think about power, justice, and the way we treat people we assume can't fight back, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.